Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Andrew Eborn Show. Now, my guest today has over 40 years' experience in international film development and production, including such monster hits as The Muppets, Shrek, Madagascar, Toy Story 2, The Father of the Bride, and Kung Fu Panda, which grossed over an impressive 600 million worldwide. He was nominated for an Academy Award and won the Annie for Best Direction of an Animated Feature. He's had a rich career with several of the world's global players from CBS, NBC, Walt Disney, Paramount, and many, many more. He's also worked with a galaxy of stars from Jackie Chan, Jack Black, Angelina Jolie, and many others, wonderful people such as Lucy Liu and indeed the fabulous Johnny Depp. He moved to London at the beginning, about 6 years ago, to film Sherlock Gnomes, which was a sequel to the 2011 hit Gnomeo and Juliet, and is just about to return to LA. But before he leaves on that jet plane, I'm delighted he's made a glorious return to the show. Please welcome John Stevenson. How are you doing, John?
I'm good. Nice to be here.
It's lovely to have you back.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a delight. And I'll tell you what, talk about change. People now, coming out of the pandemic, have had to change and to adapt. You're leaving us. We've now got to know you so well. You're leaving us back to LA. How do you cope with change?
Pretty well, I think. I like change. It's you know, the challenge of having to sort of adapt is useful. I think it's one of the key things in staying creative and being, you know, you have to be creatively agile to work in the creative arts. Certainly to be a director, you need to be prepared to change your thinking, you know, at a moment's notice if something can't be done the way you want or there's some practical problem that comes up. So, you know, change is sort of it's part of the job that I do, and you know, there's stuff which is always sad about a change. I'm sad about leaving London. I've been here for 6 years, had a great time, made, you know, great friends, enjoyed living here and the whole sort of, you know, London vibe. So there's sadness, but there's also excitement. You know, I'm going back to Los Angeles, which is also a great city, a very different kind of a city to London. So there's, you know, there's a, you know, there's one chapter closes, another one opens. You know, change is good.
And it's a massive difference. I mean, LA and London both have fantastic advantages. But I mean, we were discussing on the way here that trying to remember how to live in LA.
Yeah, there will be a period of re-entry. I don't doubt. You know, I mean, you know, London sort of that works out. LA is just, you know, just a giant ink block.
You work in the PR office for LA, don't you? It's
well,
what?
No, I love LA. LA is a great city. It's an infinitely flexible city. It's much more flexible in many ways than London is. It just takes a while to figure it out. So I'm happy to be an advocate for Los Angeles. Los Angeles often gets a bad rap. It used to get a very bad rap when I lived in San Francisco. Also a lovely city, a great city. But LA is a terrific city.
No, it's fantastic.
It's a great, one of the world's great cities. Once you figure it out, it can pretty much do anything you want. You know, figuring it out might take you a little time. And people used to say, you know, Los Angeles it's a great place to live and not such a great place to visit because sometimes it's quite hard to figure out, you know, what you want and where that is. And also it does take a long time to get places in Los Angeles. But when you find the places that you like, they'll be as
You'll
good
be
as,
back to the usual sort of.
Well, yeah, they'll be as good as anything you find anywhere. So I'm looking forward to.
But the 6 years has sped by, hasn't it? And
it has, yeah.
We talk about this. I mean, you've dealt in this really impressive career, and we touched on this last time that we spoke about the DNA of a global hit and your glorious career.
There isn't
one. It's a great episode, though. It's a great episode. Working with the best in the industry from every possible side, what sort of lessons have you learned along the way?
Well, I always say, and it's still true to this day. I mean, you know, it was true when I was 19 and just a spotty sprog. But everything that you know, all the things that I've ever learned of the greatest value, either personally, professionally, creatively, you know, I learned from Jim Henson when I was working with Jim and the people on the the original Muppet Show in the 70s when I was, you know, literally just 19 and didn't know anything. And you know, I just got very, very lucky to have a sort of a friend and mentor who sort of embodied all the very best things, you know, about being a person and about being a leader and about being a director and a producer and a creator. So I had, you know, somebody to look to and emulate and go, oh, that's how you should be. That's how it. And I was, you know, unbelievably lucky to get that, you know, and not only at that age, but somebody like Jim Henson. There are very, very few Jim Hensons in the world ever at any time.
You always cite Jim Henson as one of the biggest inspirations in your career, the biggest in your career. What was it about Jim that made him so special?
Oh, a lot of things. I mean, Jim was very special in a lot of areas. But he was kind, you know. Jim was an infinitely kind person, you know, personally and professionally. And I was 19 when I was on the Muppet Show, and so I got to see someone model immaculate professional behaviour as well as, you know, immaculate, you know, human behaviour as the leader and chief inspirer and collaborator and you know, the creative linchpin of the company. So I was blessed by having like an incredibly rare example of how to be, you know, as good at your job as anybody could be, to be as successful as anybody could be, to create stuff that you know, change the culture, because it's perhaps a little hard to understand now how big an effect the Muppets had in the 70s when they came on the scene. They really, you know, they had a huge cultural impact, and people really, really wanted, you know, big stars wanted to appear on the show, and so he had all this huge success, and he was incredibly modest and very generous and very kind and deeply appreciative of people, you know, doing good work. As I said, the best gift you could ever get if you worked with Jim was to make him laugh. Right. You know, if you got Jim laughing because you came up with a puppet design or a joke or something he was going to use, and he was delighted by it, he would just have this great, you know, laugh. That was, you know, that was better than any Christmas bonus or anything.
Absolutely, and it's what we touched on last time as well, is that the one thing that is really infectious is passion.
Passion, oh yeah, and we all, you know, everybody who worked for Jim, you know, was doing it because we loved Jim, we loved what he wanted to do, and the fact that he invited us in, and his enthusiasm and his passion and his, you know, was infectious. You know, and we had this great opportunity to work on something, you know, unique and fantastic, and we didn't want to drop the ball. We didn't want to be, you know, whatever capacity you're working in, whether you're a puppeteer or a puppet builder or doing art like I was, you didn't want to be the person who was, you know, who had let the side down by their work not being as good as everybody else's. So it helped make everybody want to be the top of their game. And you knew you were doing something great, you know.
And the show itself, I mean, you touched on this, it attracted some of the world's biggest superstars who wanted to be in there because, as you say, the infectious enthusiasm, the passion that Jim instilled, everybody on the set would do that. And I can always tell, working in different TV studios around the world, is that when you get everybody involved, it shows on screen, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't fake that. You know, you can't. You know, there are definitely the productions that you do, you know, and even if, you know, everybody does their most professional best, you can tell it's kind of, you know, when you're paying the rent, it's a gig, you know, and you do your best work, but it's not setting anybody's, you know, hair alight with how, you know, and then you can see the ones where you can see, you know, okay, everybody really loved working on this show, you know, like Lord of the Rings, you know, those Peter Jackson films. You can see everybody who worked on that production in any capacity was just like, we're making Lord of the Rings. It's amazing. And you could just see every detail in those films is absolutely as good as it possibly could be. You know, so I love that. And I think an audience can always see that. They can see the films which are, that's a well-made hamburger, or that's a home-cooked meal that's been given to me with love, you know, and I think audiences respond to that.
Oh no, they certainly respond to it. And as I say, a lot of A-list celebrities from every walk of life were desperate to come on to the show. Talk to me about some of the people who appeared on The Muppet Show.
Oh, blimey, I mean, anybody who was anybody in the 70s pretty much appeared on the show. I mean, you know, Rudolph Nureyev, you know, Christopher Reeve. I mean, you know, if I cited 5 years worth of guest stars, it's just, you know, it just goes on and on. And it was a sort of, you know, the week was interesting. You know, the guest star day I think was a Tuesday. Yeah, Monday was music day, and then we normally shoot the guest stars on a Tuesday. I say we shoot. I mean, I was just a monkey. I was an amoeba. I wasn't important to the show at all. But I was, you know, Tuesday was guest star day, and quite often that would spill over to Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday they would do the non-guest star stuff, and then editing the previous show would be on the Saturday, and then rehearsals for the new show on the Sunday. So, you know, Jim never got a day off.
Right.
You know, I think the puppeteers got 1 day off when Jim was editing the previous show on the Saturday, but Jim worked 7 days a week.
Yeah. And again, they always say if you do something that you love, you never work a day's work in your life.
Yeah, no, and Jim loved it. That was what he'd always wanted to do. You know, and in a sense, I think if you choose a career in the creative arts, whatever, as a cartoonist or a puppeteer or a film director, an animator, actor, whatever you want to be, that's what you're choosing.
Sure.
You know, you see something that is meaningful to you at an impressionable age that makes you go, it would be fun to do that, wouldn't it? It would be fun to be a special effects guy or an animator or an actor. You know, it's the fun that makes you want to do it. No one goes into anything going, oh my God, that looks like hard work. That's going to be a pain in the bum to do. That's never motivated anybody. You know, you do it because it's like, I will enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
That looks like something I'll have fun doing. So the fun is, I think, you know, a vital part, and you have to preserve that in yourself if you're going to do good work. You have to recall through all the layers of getting older and crumblier and, you know, all of that stuff. You know, what was that inspiration when I was 6 or 8 or whenever it hit you that made you fired up and want to go, I want to try and be an actor or whatever. And if you can keep finding that, you know, then hopefully you'll still be able to be in touch with whatever you know believe is good, so that you'll always have a, you know, you'll have your own personal litmus test of whether you're doing good work or not. You know, and if you lose that, then I don't know really how you can self-monitor whether you're doing the best you can do. So I'd really, you know, as nerdy and geeky and weird and weedy and you know, all those things as I was as a kid, I do try and protect, you know, that awkward child that still lives deep buried under all these layers of old geezerdom, you know.
Old geezerdom. What a great phrase. I love
well, because that kid's the only thing that keeps me honest.
But also, and it is that honesty, it is that making people feel special, it is that inclusiveness, which was so great about Jim, and the various others that you dealt with. When you see situations in production, as there are in any business, any workplace, problems occur. There are crisis management and how you deal with those problems and reassess yourself. What have been the big lessons in that front? How do you manage a crisis? How do you adapt when these problems occur?
Well, I think if you've picked a career in television or film, then you've embraced the idea that you're going to be faced with problems. You know, it's not going to be a 9-to-5 kind of career. It's not going to, you know, no battle plan withstands contact with the enemy. So, you know, it's a sort of career where things will go wrong all the time, you know, and that's okay, you know. And if it's not okay, then you've picked the wrong business, you know, because you're going to encounter this all the time. You can't do what you wanted to do for some reason. There's no money. The weather's changed, you know, the set hasn't been built, or it's got washed away, or, you know, we can't shoot there this week for some, you know, whatever it is, you know, or even in animation, there are things that you planned a certain way, but, you know, you can't actually do it. You can't get the people, you haven't got the money, whatever. You have to change your plans, you know, but you have to maintain the vision. And actually, that's one of the things that I find actually the most exciting. When production, a producer or somebody comes to me and goes, you can't do that thing you wanted to do, you can't do that thing. We can't afford it, we haven't got the time, whatever the reason. but you still have to do something. That problem solving of what can I do with sixpence and half an hour, as opposed to $100 million in 2 years. You know, that trying to, I still want to achieve this creative goal, but I've only got, you know, I've got a day to shoot it and, you know, and no money. So how do I stage the Battle of Hastings, you know, in a day with 3 people? You know, that's a great creative challenge.
What was the answer to that one then,
Well,
John?
I don't know. Shadows, probably. I don't know. or look at Orson Welles. I mean, you want to see one of the best. You know, Chimes at Midnight has one of the best, you know, fight scenes in all movie history. Brilliantly put together, brilliantly edited. He had like sort of, you know, 20 people or something, you know, to do this massive medieval battle. And you wouldn't tell it from looking at it. So well constructed. So you know, or you know, his Othello, the fight in the bathhouse, because the costumes were stuck on a train somewhere, and so he had to come up with, well, how do I do the scene with no costumes? A bathhouse, and it's
and movie history is peppered, if you like, with similar stories. I mean, the great thing about Jaws, you know, big star is he wasn't there, was he? I mean, Jaws was just the fid, I think, when they started.
It didn't really work. So you know, Steven Spielberg apparently just decided, you know, we will indicate the shark with sound effects and POV rather than actually show it too much, because it doesn't work as well as we hoped. But made it much more, you know, all you had to hear was those 3 bars, you know, you know, and you start going.
Already on one bar, you've got me going. You know, it's true.
Yeah.
And that's something. And what's really clever as well, though, is looking at that resilience that you have to have. So you have to be flexible. You have to have resilience. You have to create that energy of fun, so that when there are problems, you work on it as a team.
Yeah.
So rather than being divisive, it's not the blame game.
No, well,
it's let's work on solutions.
First of all, there's no time. So any time spent in pointing fingers at who screwed up is a waste of time.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing you don't have on any production, even if you're like a $200 million gigantic movie, you know, you may have all the money in the world, but you never have enough time. You know, Kung Fu Panda, we were on it for 4 years. Still wasn't enough time. There was still so much stuff we would like to have had more time to do better. So you're always racing the clock.
What would you have done better on Kung Fu Panda?
Oh, the list is huge.
Give me top 3.
I really wanted to do a scene that had, you know, Chinese junks on the water at night. We couldn't afford to do water. Okay. So they didn't get to do it, but they got to do it in the sequel. So I was very jealous.
Other two bits?
Oh, blimey. When Tai Lung escaped from prison, we were limited by the amount of explosions we could have on camera. So I think we were allowed 2. So we wanted lots, and so we couldn't actually show them. The scene works fine because we managed to figure it out by using sound effects and lighting. It made you kind of think you were seeing more explosions than you actually were. But I think we only could show 2, and I like to blow things up, so I'd have shown. I would have shown a lot more if I could. The third one. Well, this was cut for a good story reason, which is the really only reason you should cut anything. Tai Lung had a gang at one point, and they were my favourite characters that Nico Marlett, the character designer, had come up with. They were this great. It was a gorilla and a crocodile and a water buffalo, and they really were hilarious, funny bad guys, and I just thought they were great. And at some point, if you'd have asked me if there was one thing I was sure was going to be in the movie, it would have been Tai Lung's gang, because I love these characters. And then at some, you know, it became clear to all of us that actually the gang was not helpful, because what we needed was Poe to go one-on-one with the heavyweight champion of the world. So the heavyweight champion of the world doesn't need a gang. So the gang had to go. I think most of the character designs that Nico came up with ended up in the subsequent movies. I think a lot of those, you know, characters either sort of found their way into Panda 2 or 3. So nothing was wasted, you know. But I was sad not to get a chance.
And it is difficult. I mean, as a perfectionist, sometimes I don't know. Is there flexibility? Is there room for perfectionists? Because as a director, you've mentioned 3. I'm sure if I sat with you, I could press you for severile more. When you watch the movie back, how do you feel about it?
Depressed, usually. Really, I mean, in all honesty, I only ever watch. I can spend like 3 or 4 years working on a film. I'll only ever watch it finished maybe 3 times, and those will be like the crew screening and a couple of premieres that I have to do, and then I'll never watch it again.
Right.
I'll go to my grave and never watch Kung Fu Panda again or Sherlock Gnomes, because it's just too painful. All I see are the things that I wish I'd, could have helped make better.
And that's my point, is that directors, and I speak to lots of creative people, and that's what they say. They find it very difficult, because that's why you have a director's cut sometimes. It may not be intelligible to anybody else, but it's what the director really wanted. And you get pressures from other people to deal with things. How do you cope with that yourself?
Sometimes not as well as I would like to think. Yes, it's very frustrating when, something that you believe is the right, way to go, and you're sort of, either having to fight for that idea or prevented from doing it for, any number of reasons. It can be, very frustrating and hard, particularly if you've got, your heart set on doing something you believe will make a difference. And so if that gets, short-circuited, it's difficult, and I fully confess there are times when I have handled those situations with way less grace and tact than I should. But you should handle those situations with grace and tact.
And it's being prepared for that, isn't it? And that's why it's so important, because so rarely, people always talk about success. They very rarely talk about the failures that led to that success. And I think the other thing
failures are great. Failures are the best teacher. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the other thing that happens is in the profession, and it's fairly recent years people have started to talk about it, mental health is so key, isn't it? And I want us to be the generation that talks about mental health, so that others don't suffer the stigma. Because so many people and it's often the comedians, the people who've got the biggest personalities, who are the most tortured inside. How does that work? Have you found the changes in the industry, and what tips would you give to people?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? Well, the industry is changing, and I think it actually is changing for the better. I mean, it is becoming way more diverse. I think if you are not diverse in your casting, that's basically a non-starter, which is great. And I truly hope that, like Armando Iannucci's, the personal history of David Copperfield is the way to go in the future, which is just colorblind casting. We don't care whether you're Vikings or in outer space or, or like Great, in sort of Tsarist Russia. It doesn't matter. Everybody should have a chance to see themselves reflected in the stories. So, that I believe is the only way we should go forward. And certainly anything I'm working on, that's the way we will do the casting. So I do think that is getting better, and I do think that is very uppermost in a lot of studios and streaming services' minds when you go in with whatever kind of your project. How inclusive and diverse are you in your casting, whatever genre you're doing. But there's clearly, you can always do better.
Well, look, and it's good that people in the public eye are speaking about it, because I think the more that we talk about it, the more that it helps others.
Yeah.
Now, animation itself is enjoying a resurgence, if you
Yes.
like. People are telling new stories, old stories using animation. Now, you have talked about the story process. What are the top tips that you give people?
For the story process? Well, you have to master any skill. Whether it's like painting, like Picasso. Everybody thinks, well, Picasso painted all these sort of strange, ways of interpreting a human form. But it wasn't because he didn't understand how to paint the human form in a more traditional way. He had mastered all of that. He just decided to make up his own rules. So he wasn't sticking eyes on the side of one person's, somebody's face, because he didn't know how to draw or paint. So I think that's one of the things. If you to work in story, you need to understand how stories work. And you have to. If you're a director, I think you do have to write. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be able to write a script. I can't. but I can write, and I do work with writers, and I do understand in narrative form, and certainly in the sort of the limited area that I work in animation, I understand how stories, fit together and where the things should be, and where the audience is going to need this and want that, and those kind of biorhythms a story has. You have to, you can't be a director unless you understand that on some very strong and instinctual level, because that's your job, is to put the story on the screen. So understand how stories work. Read, dissect, watch, write, do whatever you can so that you understand, what a story is, what a good story is, and the difference between a good story and a not so good story, and why. And then the other thing, obviously, is everything is about human behavior. Even if you're dealing with frogs or chickens or robots or whatever, they're just symbols and stand-ins for human beings. Right. So you need to understand how human beings work, and not from watching movies or TV or plays, although that's great. You need to understand how human beings work from observation, and then you have to turn that observation into playable behavior that an actor can actually work with to provide a performance that has some integrity and truth in it, even if it's a broad comedy, because you need the audience to relate, and there's got to be something. And
it is that connection, isn't it, where people can relate to the characters, whether you're depicting them, so on and so on. So in terms of the future of the industry then, how do you see it?
Wow. Good, I think, but different. I think there's been a shift, and the power is now really with the streaming services, at least at the moment. I don't kind of see that going back to the movies. I think movies will please. I hope so, because that's I love films, but I think the streaming services have really changed stuff, and I think in a good way, certainly for animation. There's a lot more opportunity for different kinds of animation because of the streaming services. The kind of animation that would get a life theatrically was pretty limited, Had to be a kind of a big budget, family friendly, 4-quadrant movie, but go on Netflix and you can find, anime or anime inspired TV shows. You can find stuff for little kids. You can find, really adult kind of animation. You can find dark stuff, light stuff, funny stuff, esoteric stuff. There is now there are now platforms for a lot more eclectic kinds of animation than before, when really, the more sort of interesting animation would only get a very limited art house release, if at all.
No, really, really interesting stuff. Well, John, it's been a delight having you back. I know.
Is that it?
No, well, there will be more. There will be more. But when you go to LA, you promise we're going to continue the discussion.
Yeah, of course.
We'll talk about life in that. But for now, John Stevenson, thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
If you'd like to take part, do get in touch. There's going to be lots more where that come from. But for me, for now, goodbye, take care, and I'll see you next time.